Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Max Potter, and today I'm excited to chat with the incredible Pulitzer Prize-winning composer, singer, and violinist Caroline Shaw, and her mother and influential Suzuki strings teacher, Jon Shaw. Caroline, Jon, and I, and Caroline's sister Nancy, first met when we were kids at the Suzuki Institute in Greenville, North Carolina, where my father, Dalton Potter, would bring our violin shop on the road. And today we're all reconnecting to talk about Caroline and Jon's musical journey together and how that has influenced her life. How are you both doing today?
Wonderful. Such a wonderful opportunity to see you again, Dalton. I actually don't get to see Caroline very much either, so kind of have to see her through TV.
Nice to see everyone in our little rectangles.
Right. Thank God for technology. And where are you both right now?
Well, I'm in the very unexciting place of being at home, but Caroline has a much more exciting thing to say.
You're at home in Greenville, North Carolina. Yeah. I'm currently in Jacksonville, Oregon, just doing a little bit of a research trip.
Wonderful. That's so great. Okay. Well, I'm really excited to get started, and I'm really grateful to you both for being here today. I wanted to kind of start, Caroline, with a question about what your earliest memory of making music was like, and what your earliest memory for both of you was of making music together and how that was special to you.
It's hard to figure out what our memories are when we're kids, but I have this very distinct memory of holding the violin and having my mom put my fingers down on the instrument. That's for me, that's the first and clearest memory that I have of making music. But that it must have been a very long time ago.
Yeah. And what about you, Jon? What was your first memory?
Well, some of that actually, and we taught Caroline how to play hot cross buns. I think we were showing her where the fingers would go for that, and I think the first little performance memory I have of Caroline was, I was one of these mothers that was taking violins on vacation just to make sure they didn't go there practicing, and we were visiting my parents' cottage, at the beach, and took all the children out on the pier and videotaped them playing what they could play. And Caroline's piece was hot cross buns. And the entire time, the mosquitoes were biting her legs. And she did not stop. She would slap the mosquito with one foot and continue to play. So that's my first memory of her actually playing. And she wasn't even 3.
And Mom, what about you? What's your first memory of playing music as a kid?
I can remember as if it were yesterday, the day the piano arrived. I was 7. It was in the summer, and I was going to be able to start taking piano lessons in the fall from my aunt. And the piano arrived, and it was set up. My mother grew up with a Steinway, so we had to have a Steinway too. And my mother sat me down and taught me the first little song, and on the piano that she had been taught when she was a little girl. And it was da 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 dum, da 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 dum. There are words to it, but that was my first memory. And I had it was like, there's major and minor right there. That's where it began.
That's beautiful. So you also had a motherly influence in your music life. What was that dynamic like?
Yes. That dynamic was invaluable to me because I was the second of 6, so I got my parents with a little bit more motivated state of mind, and we had to practice every day. I mean, it was just one of those things. It was just as part of the day. And my mother, as we got older, we never had to do household work. We never had to wash dishes. We never had to do any of those things because my mother's attitude was, I can't practice for you. I can easily wash your dishes. And lucky us,
Wow.
So
yeah, very
it was
lucky.
just one of those. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And there was no negotiation in those days, but we were good kids. We didn't balk too much. I do remember my mother, when I would come home from school, she would say to me, you remember you have to practice today. I thought, Please don't say that. You know, I remember. Just don't say that. But,
Thanks for the reminder.
yeah, exactly.
So Caroline,
But all my parents were,
what?
Yeah, go ahead.
It's wonderful. I mean, I know we were talking about this before, that like the legacy of music making in both of our families has been hugely influential in both our lives. Obviously, you're a composer, violinist, and singer, and I sing as well now, and it becomes a family tradition in so many ways, and it's a very special bond that you really don't find in other ways, you know. And I guess I would also like to know, you know, when did you know you loved making music, and when did you, like, what about playing the violin brought you joy when you were young?
Well, I'm incredibly lucky and great. I owe my whole musical life to my mother, who is here, and who started me on, you know, when I was 2 years old playing the violin. And I think when I was younger, I did not like to practice. And but we had lots of wonderful motivational games. I think the most maybe the best one was the practice candle, where you had to, so you light the candle when you start to practice and you blow it out. And whatever. Anyway, it was this competition with my brothers. But I loved music when I was little, but I didn't quite, you know, have a context for it in my life. It was just the thing that I did. And as I got older and started playing music with friends, I think is when I really started to fall in love. And I think that's what I love about chamber music, is playing with other people. And I'm also really grateful to my mom for introducing me to other kids who played the violin, so that it became a part of my life in that way.
Yeah. Yes, it's such an influential thing to even go to these Suzuki camps when you're a little kid and see all these other little kids who are also playing the violin, who are where you are, or maybe more advanced than you are. And it becomes this sense of community that is so special. I mean, I know I treasure my memories of being in Greenville to this day. I still remember being a ridiculous monster of a child in the hallways, running around and screaming, and maybe not practicing as much as I should. Okay, I'll take your word for it, Jon. Thank you.
She was the darling of the Institute. She really was.
So, Jon, how did you know that Caroline was a gifted musician as a child? And, you know, how did you continue to nurture that as she got older?
Oh goodness, I could talk forever about that kind of thing, but I can't.
That's what we're here for.
Yeah. You know, I think every parent has a tad of Leopold Mozart in them. You know, I've got this amazing child, and you know, it's my responsibility to do. And yet, I've read a lot about Mozart before, and I knew that the difficulties of balance, the balancing of all of that. But I also can remember the moment I realized, I've got an amazing little girl here. I just want to see how far I can take it with being very careful. I remember that, and saying, golly, she is incredibly able to just sort of pick these things up so quickly. You know, and I should probably go back a little bit before the Hot Cross Buns experience, because another moment, I used to sing to her a lot, and I love the Suzuki literature because it's all based on so much arpeggiation in the beginning. I mean, May song, we all know it. And I remember so well one time when she hardly could say words very much, and I was singing the little dum da dum dum da da da, and I couldn't sing the highest note because I was embarrassed I was going to squeak, and she just popped it out. And I thought, wow, wow. So you know, a lot of those things happened early on too. But she was unusual. No doubt about it.
Yeah. So besides the candle game, what was practice like in your home? And what do you have from both of you as some of the, like, some tips maybe for parents of young musicians who maybe don't always want to practice, maybe love practicing? I mean, I know it runs the gamut in some of my students as well. Some of them they love to sit down at the piano or love to work on their singing. And then some of them, it's like, I'll bribe you. Would you like 80 stickers? You know, so do you have any advice as, you know, a teacher and also a parent of young musicians?
Should I go first on that one?
You should. I will just preface this by saying that I think that my mom is an absolutely brilliant violin teacher, and the way I've seen her now, work with other young kids, and the way that she can understand what's going on in their mind and present material or ideas in just the right way is something is really incredible. So, Mom, you should definitely answer that question.
Well, thank you. But here's what I would say also. I was far more effective with others' children than I was with my own. I was a much better teacher to everyone else. And I would sometimes lose my patience. And that's when Caroline's dad would step in. So lucky us, both of us, it really took us both. I have to say, speaking of the social aspect of learning music, in my opinion, that is 50% of it. It is 50% of it. Because if you don't have that, it's a rare child that can be motivated on their own. And if you've got the right social environment and situation, the other comes naturally. So I that's what I have preached all my life. And I am so grateful for that by way of Joanne Bath. And also that's how Suzuki set the whole thing up. He set it up as a big, gigantic, wonderful party. And that's that was the kind of the context upon which I started teaching, which felt so right to me. And you can't be a lone star. That's why violin's been so much better than piano. But as far as back into actual practicalities of making a child do something they don't want to do, there's nothing wrong, in my opinion, with all kinds of games. And that's another thing Suzuki taught us early on. You make everything a game, but you change the game every week. And sometimes you bring a game back. Oh, I remember we did this. That was really fun. And it works for about a week, another week, 2 weeks maybe. But, he somehow was able to sort of start the whole Suzuki world off in the healthy part of competition. There's nothing wrong with competition in life, but it can be handled in a healthy way. And it can be handled in a very unhealthy way. And I think your job as a teacher is basically to find the healthy mix of bringing a little touch of competitiveness into it, even sometimes just with yourself.
Right.
So it doesn't have to be all fun and games, but it has to be a whole lot of fun and games.
Yeah, of course. I mean, that's what
did you say, Karen?
What did you say?
Sorry.
I'll say this, Matt. Max, pardon. I now see how difficult this is for people. I have a closet full. I have a Santa's tote bag full of things to do. Should I run out of ideas? And I haven't had to dip into the bottom of it yet, but there were times when I got real close to the bottom. Yep. But and I hate to give any of that up. I save them just because it's fun for me to know these little things I used to do. Anyway, Caroline, I had much better games after you were gone. Too bad I didn't have my idea. I'm a much better teacher now than I was when you were a little girl.
I think I would have done anything for a stamp on my hand. I think that was the big motivation.
I remember those.
Stamps, there's a music note stamp that you put on my that was like I would live for that stamp or that sticker. There was a little block that we would roll that sort of roll the block and decide what thing to practice. But yeah, I think that idea of making it feel like a game is really it's kind of part of the fun of playing. That was really how I kept going. And kids do, we do all kinds of activities that, sports and I think making violin feel like something that is both a beautiful endeavor in life, but also something that's fun in a game.
Well, and Max, the other thing that I'm constantly giving Joanne Bath credit for all that I am basically. And she was very, always so attuned to the season. So music was part of whatever the season was. And even to St. Patrick's Day, it's a single day season, but it was incorporated into the musical world. And it allows you then to constantly come up with something different. I mean, Easter, for example, with the Easter egg thing, and you put a little name of something inside every Easter egg and you get to choose which one. I mean, in something like that, you can also engage the child in what is your idea? What do you think might work? Or, let's say you have a little younger sibling in your family. Let's think of something that would work for your younger sibling. It gives them a chance to sort of engage in the game.
That's
See,
beautiful.
all those things I learned
that.
after you left. Yeah. But it took me many, many years to get those ideas settled in my mind. But I think engaging music with the season allows the child to feel incorporated. It's part of my world. And that came from Joanne, by the way.
That's beautiful. Yeah, I mean, we get into this world as professional musicians going to music schools and conservatories and things like that. And there's always this emphasis on practicing fundamentals, getting your scales right for vocalists, the breath technique and the diction and all that. And sometimes I think we do lose sight that like the whole point of all of that is to be able to play later on and be able to have fun and create joy in music. So it's really one of the things that I thought was always special growing up was exactly what you're talking about, is that emphasis on play in music and learning, that it isn't just like sit down and practice for half an hour. It's like, part of life, and it's part of who you are. You brush your teeth, you practice your violin, you eat your breakfast, you listen to your song, and so it's really wonderful to hear that that was such a part of your dynamic when Caroline was younger and with the rest of your students.
But of course, it's so why do I have to practice? So why? And I think with when you keep the social aspect of it sort of foremost, well, because we're going to get to do this, and your friends will be there, and they're all practicing. The child doesn't have to say, well, I don't, I want to be better than my friends. I don't want to embarrass myself in front of my friends, so I guess I will. I'll just go ahead along with it for now, just because it keeps you sort of, part of the group where nobody shines. Everybody's just in there together. And yeah, I think, and I used to kind of almost create maybe a little bit, not necessarily real events, so that they would think they had to practice for something,
Right.
And the event itself wasn't really all that. It was a competition that was really most unimportant, but it just gave a chance to sort of say, we have this to do, by the way,
Yes.
You don't want...
Yes, a task at hand, of course.
Yeah.
So off of this, Caroline, what was special for you? I mean, Greenville, North Carolina, if other people who are watching don't know, had one of the most largest communities of Suzuki families in the country. It was a very special dynamic. It was something that, for me, I got to go for a week or two every summer, and I felt like I was part of the family. And I wanted to know what it was like for you, Caroline, growing up in that community full time. And for you as well, Jon, like what was special about that, and what was different, did you think, compared to other musical communities that you have visited or been a part of?
It's strange. I didn't know how special it was when I was younger. You just sort of, this was the world, but there were hundreds of kids and families that were learning the violin. Oddly, not very many cellists, which was a problem later on. It's a sea of violins in Greenville. That's why I ended up playing cello in high school, because there was nobody else to play cello. But it was, we keep talking about the social aspect of it, but that was really important. It was something that was kind of a part of life, where you saw your friends and you did this thing together, and it wasn't particularly competitive, but it was just something that I didn't realize basically how special that community was and is.
Absolutely. So in that, growing up in that community, what was that transition from a life like that to studying music more seriously, for instance, in a higher education setting, and what were some of the things that you maybe learned while you were growing up that helped you with that transition?
Yeah, I studied with, my mom was my first teacher and then sort of transitioned to Joanne Bath, and then I studied with Mrs. Bath until I went to college. And the gift that she and my mom gave me was this sense of enjoyment in music. Like, when you went on stage, she wouldn't say like, make sure you remember this and this and this. She would give me a huge hug and say, enjoy. And like, that is the thing that you should be thinking about, as a kid going to play something. Is this is supposed to feel like a hug. And even going through college, where I didn't always feel that way, because there's a lot of new pressures and things like the stress of seeing competition and realizing and trying to figure out where you sit in the scheme of musicians and violinists and careers and what does it all mean. But I held on to that like hug and that bit of advice, and it's still a big part of my life.
That's so beautiful. Yeah, it is interesting that transition into the higher education world of music, and how much, again, like I was saying earlier, you can lose sight of the fact that like we do this because we love it. Like you always have to remember why you started. I know for me on audition days or performance days where I'm kind of feeling like, oh, I don't know about this today, my voice isn't working, or I'm tired, or whatever it is, I always ask myself, you remember that little kid who, John reminded me of this, sang Patsy Cline with her dad on stage in Greenville in the talent show? She didn't think about any of these things. She just loved singing. So I try to bring that. I try to bring that with me, especially with my students that I have now. I have a very small studio of singers and pianists, and we always try to look at the fun of it as well, as opposed to, oh, this is hard, I can't do it, it's scary. Well, let's learn it and have fun with learning it, as opposed to being intimidated by it. And it's interesting that you say that about your transition, because that for me was also a big part of my transition into the higher education world as well. So it's really special, and it's amazing that Joanne had that influence that you've carried with you as well.
And could I say just something about Joanna also there? I watched her for 40 years really teaching, and goodness gracious, what greater apprenticeship could one have? And the fact, Greenville is a college town, but it's just your average American town with average American people. And she created such incredible musicians out of just your classic American person, or really not just necessarily American, but it's not as if this was, all Harvard children here kind of thing.
Right.
But what she did, I watched her over and over again with a student. Now, in Caroline's case, it was different because she was, outstanding from the start, but over and over with students who were, their typical not doing what they should be doing, not realizing their potential. And rather than come down hard on them and make them do something they hated, the practice of the scales or the technique or any of those things that sometimes, you should have done that sooner than this, she didn't do that. She said, I cannot do that until I see that they are motivated for themselves. I have to wait until I see that. When I see that, then we can do other things. But if you kill that off early on, you have essentially basically clipped your roses too early, kind of thing. So there it is. I mean, and I'm so grateful for that, because she said you have to wait until that motivation comes from within. The motivation to love music, to love it for yourself, basically.
That's amazing. That's so amazing.
Yeah.
Wow. So Caroline, when did you realize that you wanted to compose music? What inspired that move in that direction? And how was that like shifting of focus for you?
My mom could probably talk to this. I think a lot of kids make up songs when we're younger, sort of make things up. And then I became more self-conscious as I got older in high school. And once I got to college, I started sort of writing music for myself, kind of in secret, and then starting to kind of share it with some people. And then over the next few years, I started making, music for myself or for friends or for dancers. And once I started playing for ballet and modern dance classes, I would play like piano and viola and percussion, all sorts of things. I realized I was making, hours and hours of music every day, every week. And I wanted to sort of organize it a little bit more. And that's how I started writing more music. But it really comes from this place of imagining a sound, like there was something that I wanted to hear, or a combination of musical events that I really wanted to hear that I hadn't heard before. And I was like, well, the only way to hear that is to to make it.
Great.
And that's still at the heart of it. On its best days, ideally, that's what making music feels like, because I want to, there's something that I want to hear that I've never heard before, but also feels like it has always existed. How do I make that thing and share it in a healthy way? Yeah.
Wow.
But the transition, but you asked about just sort of career transition. I don't know. It's all sort of in flux all the time. And
of course.
I think everything feeds into each other in a weird way. I think some of the very technical parts of learning the violin, just sort of understanding this instrument, your relationship to it, and all the things that you're balancing with every single note is still part of my thought process, whether I'm writing dots and lines in terms of a scored piece or working in Logic and making something electronic. Still that same kind of set of what's the tool in front of me, and how do I make what I want to hear out of it?
Wow, that's incredible. How do these soundscapes kind of come to you? What inspires that in you when you desire this thing that you want to hear that you haven't heard before? Is that
I don't know where
it goes. Like it comes from your environment, or like just in the back of your head, you're like, oh, no one's made this before?
I think I tell younger musicians and composers that it's sort of, those ideas are floating around all the time. And then this is also a gift from my mom and from Mrs. Bath, this idea of thinking about music like as in terms of color and visual and painting and texture. Like that was all the language that they used when I was learning music, and it's now definitely the way that I think about music. So the inspiration for a piece can come from anything. It can be a painting or a plant or an object, and just that question of, if this object was music, what would it sound like? Which I do a lot with an orange. I'm kind of obsessed with oranges, but like it's sort of like an endless question of like, if that orange were a piece of music, what would it sound like to me? And then I just kind of get going.
That's amazing. That's so cool.
Yeah, Max. Yeah, could I say something? I can well remember the moment that we realized Caroline had perfect pitch, because it was way early on, and she didn't have note names for anything. Everything was just an oral, this is the way you sound. It sounds, this is the way I make it on this instrument. And then all of a sudden, I guess you were just beginning to learn note names. I don't remember. So Mrs. Pfaff sort of said, wait a second here. I think she has perfect pitch. So she started giving her a little bit of a test. And so then the question to Caroline was, well, how did you know what to call it before? I mean, if it was always something you always knew, you didn't know to give it, do, re, mi, what was it? And that's when she first, you said it was some sort of color to you. And so that's when Mrs. Bath just seized upon that one. And so everything, by the way, I want to also interject, Caroline's quite well-rounded. If you see this painting behind me, so she's quite an artist in addition to everything else. She wrote haiku in college. So her sense of creativity doesn't just come from notes on a page. It's literary as well. And by the way, she's a brilliant mathematician. And she had a math teacher in high school who was also an artist and made math artistic.
Mom, I'll send you this music. I just made a music video for this other project I'll send to you soon. I got to send it to Mrs. Worth, my statistics teacher, because it has all these parabolas. Anyway, I'll send it to you soon.
Yeah. It's all these marvelous people that were so encouraging for so many years. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah,
so,
I mean,
it's not just notes.
It takes a village. Everyone says that about raising children, and I mean, I don't know. I only have a dog that loves to scream, but this is very this is evidence here.
Now, Max, I'll say one other thing, and I don't like to hog the stage, but I will if I get the stage.
Go ahead.
I can remember also as if it were yesterday when Caroline said to me, "You never let me doodle around." She had two older brothers. It's always a matter of who gets my practice. And so they were playing, and she was. And I said, no, honey, we have to do this. She says, you never let me doodle around. It went straight like a dagger into my heart she's right. We are always teaching these notes. You must learn this, and this. Mm-hmm. And so it was early on. I want to just do what I want to do. And so here's what Mrs. Bath told her. she also, we did a lot of fiddle tunes, which helped with the idea of improvisation. And she, when we would go to, the Christmas Carol concert that she's played a zillion trillion times, she would sit on the back and make up her own harmonies. I said, you just go back there in the back. Nobody knows whether you're here or not, and make up your own stuff. Do you remember saying to me, you never let me doodle around?
No, but I was just thinking that maybe that's what I professionally do now. I just doodle around professionally.
Yeah.
Add it to the resume. Professional doodle arounder. Oh, that's incredible. So Jon, having had this experience with Caroline, what would be your biggest advice to parents of gifted young musicians? How to guide and nurture? I mean, maybe even especially for those parents who don't have, the musical roots that the three of us have.
Well, I've just read the book that was written by the mother of the family in England, the Conne Masons. The family I'm speaking of, 7 musicians, highly incredible. The cellist is the one who played at the Harry Meghan wedding, if you remember. There was this marvelous cellist. Well, he's from a family of 7 unbelievably talented musicians, and the mother just wrote a book about it, about growing up. And it was a really interesting thing. Yeah, and I think she was a little more intense than I might have been. But I think, saying we've got to make learning fun and games gets a bad rap sometimes, but I think it still has to be fun and games. And if you don't have that aspect of it, so however that, and I used to, my parents, you can get into sort of the bad bribe situation where, you promise your child a new car every time they do something right. And I said, but sometimes the smallest little item can be something that if you can create these little, sometimes the game of chance is the best one. The rolling of the dice, which one am I going to get this time? Which egg am I going to open? Oh, gosh, I get to play that one now. Well, that's really going to be fun. So it just puts you, it's a lot of pressure on you, but that's where the success will be. If you have nothing but hardcore demand on your child, you're not going to end up with a happy little child.
Right.
So,
right. Of course.
Rebellious little kid. So,
yeah. No, go ahead.
I tried to let them do a little rebellion. Did I ever let you rebel, Caroline? You kind of did it quietly. Sometimes it's kind of nice to be part of a large family.
So in addition to that, for those parents who maybe aren't musical, how would you suggest they feel like they can be involved? Because I know for some of my students' parents, it's like an alien world. They don't know anything about music, so they don't feel like they can be the at-home teacher that we talk about, And I know that some teachers say, well, what if you take violin lessons together? That's not always a reality for everyone. And I, as someone who has experience with this, what do you suggest for those parents out there who are like, oh, I've never played a note in my life. I don't even know how to help my child with this.
Well, I think every parent that brings their child to music to take is usually themselves a frustrated musician. Either they were a musician and didn't go as far as they would like to have gone since they didn't have a parent that made sure they got their practicing done, or any of those things. And also every child loves it when their parent can play with them. So I happen to, from the very beginning, I always create situations where on every recital, the family does something. And sometimes it's just a matter of, whatever, on whatever level they can do. And you see this cello in the background. So many of those early Suzuki songs can be accompanied with, pizzicato open strings on the cello. So sometimes just a little something like that gives the parents a sense of, I get to be part of this. I'm not shut out. They will never, be able to reach a level that can compare to the child, let's say. But if you get a parent slightly involved, it takes the tension away from their feeling, I don't know what I'm doing here, and I'm on the outside looking in, because that's what they're feeling, really. And yes, exactly. I also tell every child a lot. I did this with you, Caroline. I learned so much after you were gone. You're so lucky you have your mom and dad love to get to be with you when you play. So they realize that I'm the lucky child that has a mom and a dad or a dad or caregiver or whatever that likes to watch me do this. And because any child, you're natural. Watch me on the monkey bars. No matter who it is, please watch me. Somebody watch me. And so that's also a way of bridging that gap. And I will also say, I think sometimes having parents who are too schooled is a detriment, because you have such ambition that is sometimes unrealistic. And so, so it's not always a good thing to have parents as musicians. And Caroline had a dad who was a physician. He wasn't really a musician. He was a musician, an amateur musician, but he was 100% supportive daddy. So she didn't
beautiful.
have. Yeah.
That's so beautiful.
You want to tell your story about dad?
Oh, I'd love to hear it. I mean, it's Mother's Day.
Sure.
Yeah, but let's hear it. I mean, Mother's Day coming up.
I just love how I have no idea who's watching or where, but this is all these we're just talking about this stuff now. There's I used to fall asleep at night with my dad is a wonderful person and loves practicing the piano, and he would very diligently use the metronome. But would drift so far from the metronome, very sort of slowly phasing out, so that it was not anywhere close, but the metronome's still going, and then I would just fall asleep to this sound of like an early Beethoven sonata, just drifting further and further. And it's maybe I'll make a whole album that's so just that.
And see, the
I
difference
love it.
in Caroline, she incorporated that into her creativity. I would have to close the door. It would bother me so badly. I can't even listen to this any longer. And she wouldn't. She made that part of her creative world. Wow.
That's incredible. Wow, what a special childhood. That's wonderful. So Caroline, based on where you are now and what you do daily for your career and your life as a musician, what's some advice that you would give to your younger self and maybe the other young musicians who might be watching right now?
I would tell my younger self to floss more. I think, I feel very grateful to the many teachers and people in the community who I think gave me a wonderful environment for learning music. And one of those things was about being kind and generous. And I feel like I did learn that earlier on. I think I had a lot of I was very stuck in one particular style of music when I was younger, and I didn't know very much about other kinds. And it's funny now looking back at how under a rock I was. And I would tell myself, you should really, buy some other albums and listen to a lot of other music and think about, how that relates to what you're doing. I would also, I think, just the advice to all younger musicians, say, if there's something that you don't know how to do, if someone asks you, could you do this thing? Say yes. There's a way to figure out, what it is, or there's a way to learn something in the process. And it's not about being, good at it or the best or making something important or large. It's about this, learning something along the way that you don't know how that will feed you in your life and your community later on. But if it's a really authentic journey through some kind of exploration, it will be the seed for something later on. So say yes to things that you don't know how to do, because it will be a gift later on somehow.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. 100%. Well, I have a few questions from audience members who submitted them. There's only two. So the first one is from Helen in New Jersey. What are some of the ways that music has helped you both in your non-musical lives?
Caroline, you go first.
I think about chamber music a lot, and the sort of the the conversations that I would have, as a young person in a quartet, where you're trying to play a piece, you're trying to put something together, but it's also an interpersonal dynamic where you're trying to communicate with the violist that I'm not sure if we're in the same time. How do you try to solve a problem together without hurting anyone's feelings, but also identifying what could be changed and sort of understanding what's changeable and what's not. And that really, musical challenge is I think a wonderful metaphor for a lot of other things in life. Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. Well, I can add to that, at this point, a senior citizen, and I have found tremendous joy and pleasure in bringing senior citizens together to learn an instrument, and we all come to our stage in life with a bagload of, things that were right and wrong with all of us. And I wouldn't be able to relate to anyone except I get to do it by way of music. And it's everyone's tool for coming together, everyone's reason for getting to come together. And so lucky me that I have that I agree with Caroline entirely on that one. I wouldn't have known half the people in my life had I not been a musician, and lucky me to know them. Yeah. Most musicians become deans, Haven't you noticed that most musicians in a music school become deans because they're the only ones who know how to get along with other people and know how to manage the foibles of personalities.
Yep. It's always an adventure, especially when you get into a new collaborative process with other creatives that you haven't met before or haven't worked with before. And diplomacy is key. So another question is for Caroline from Carly B. How do you approach a new piece?
Every piece is a little bit different. The piece that I'm working on this morning is meant for 30 musicians in the woods. So that's a very different way of thinking than something I did a couple of weeks ago, which was collaborating sort of electronically with a pop artist. What I like to do is, if I'm working with someone in particular, who I ask, what do you like? If I'm writing for a individual singer or a quartet or orchestra, what's the music that you like to play? What is your history? What are you interested in? How do you want to grow? And that usually is a really strong guide towards, something musical. It feels like the most important thing. I always think that, people are more important than music, but if music kind of follows the person or follows it's something really rooted in someone's personality and individuality, it will generate something that you wouldn't have come up with otherwise. Yeah.
That's incredible. The idea of how do you want to grow? I don't think I've ever had someone bring me a piece of music in that light, and that, wow, that's incredible. Thank you.
I mean, ideally, I don't always work that way, but that's the ideal kind of collaboration. Yeah.
Right, of course, naturally. Okay, so actually there's one more, and it is also from Carly B. What can we do now to support composers? What's the most important thing that a community, either the music community as a whole or people who are not musicians, can do to support these new composers and exploring new works?
I think, expressing and cultivating one's curiosity in new things is really what, there's of course there's financial support and institutional and logistical support, but also just knowing that, I think for composers, knowing that someone is curious and interested in hearing something different, hearing a different perspective or a different framework for listening. There's so many young composers who want to present their own exciting individual inner worlds, and we should be there for them and cultivating
Amazing.
Curiosity.
Beautiful. Yeah. So we keep getting more questions. Are you all open to doing a couple more?
Sure.
Okay,
certainly.
great. So there's one for Caroline. How did you balance your music practice with school demands when you were in high school as a young person?
Oh, I didn't practice as much as I should.
In all honesty?
In all honesty, I'm really glad I'm not in high school anymore. But I think I was aware. How did I balance things? It was so long ago. I tried to do my best, and I could have done better. But I think that being kind to yourself, especially as a young person, is really important. We're always taught to, push and accomplish and do all these things, and there's so many pressures on high school age kids right now that's different from when I grew up. And taking the time to not do something, to not do anything, and to space out and stare at the wall. I think, honestly, I did a lot of staring at the wall, and it was really important. And I think we have to remember that that's an important kind of work as well. It's where you do the deep individual growth work, in addition to studying for the math test and the history test and practicing and applying to colleges. Don't forget to just be quiet for a little bit.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I know that I went back. Yeah, of course. Especially if you have an active brain, it's very hard to be still. It's interesting because I actually taught a master class back at my high school about a year ago now, right before the pandemic started. And I remember getting a question from one of the girls saying, well, what if I really love music, but I don't know if I want to be a professional? And it was so interesting to realize that so many of these young, either academics or musicians or artists, are constantly being geared into the idea of well, if you do this thing, you have to do it at a professional level at 100% all the time, as opposed to sometimes doing something just because you love it. And that is just as important. So,
yes, that is a great answer. Yeah.
Yes, I agree.
And then there's just one more question for Jon. Do you wish that you had discovered more female composers and introduced them to teaching repertoire when, before your daughter was a composer? I guess that's the question that they're asking.
Yeah. Well, it's hard to answer that one because the literature is not necessarily there. And I think I'd rather answer it this way. I remember, when Caroline was about, whenever it was, 7th grade, 8th grade, when you wrote your first piece, the Brahms piece. Do you remember, honey? The piece we called Intermezzo. And she was just playing. She was playing viola for the first time. So she was playing, and she was just playing this piece. And I thought, what is that piece? And she says, oh, no, it's just something I've made up. And I said, well, we need to write that down. It needs to get codified. And of course, she didn't really have the goods to do that, but you sort of figured out viola clef and wrote it down, but then it didn't have a key center and didn't start, didn't end. And I think, I think more young people are not encouraged to do that kind of thing, whether they be male or female. It makes no difference, really.
Yeah.
And I think I always like it when somebody introduces and says something nice about Caroline and they don't say anything about the fact that she's a woman, because that's the real compliment, in my opinion.
Yep.
So
absolutely.
Yeah.
So that's incredible. Well, I know that all of us at Potters and Boulanger and me, we're so grateful to both of you for taking the time to chat today. It was super wonderful speaking with everyone, and I hope that somehow we've helped to inspire the next generation of musicians and their parents, be they musical or non-musical. And I also want to thank all of you who joined us live and all of the people who will watch this conversation on demand later if they could not get to a computer screen while we were here. We want to wish everyone a happy Mother's Day, especially to all of the moms and those who take on mother roles in the lives of the young people around them. We know this holiday can be difficult for many, and we hope that we've succeeded in also celebrating the happy memories of the mothers in all of our lives. So thank you for joining us. I hope everyone enjoyed the conversation and learned something new. And goes off into the rest of this week inspired. So thank you both again. And I hope that we get to continue this conversation another time as well.
Thank you so
Thank you,
much.
Max. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
And hello to your mother too, by the way, from me.
I will tell her hello and happy Mother's Day as well.
She was one of my inspirations as a mother, by the way.
She would love to hear that, and I would love to hear more
She
about
took
that
you as
from
a very feisty little girl, and just it was beautiful to watch.
Spicy is the correct adjective.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Okay. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.